Part 1 of the story of Moshe's early years. A few questions. What happened in Moshe's life between the age of 12 or 18 when he left Egypt until he arrived back at the age of 80 as the Redeemer of the Jewish people? Also, we're going to cover what happened with Moshe's staff. Where did he get it from? The famous stick he used in the desert and used in Egypt. Where did it come from? What did it look like? And also, this hatred that Bilaam has for Moshe, where does it come from? Why was Bilaam so threatened by Moshe? What's the original story of the animosity that he had towards Moshe?
Welcome to Untold Stories of the Torah, a masterclass in Jewish history, presented by Rabbi Shmuel Aber.
The start of the story begins in the year 2368 of the Jewish years, which is about 3,415 years ago. Bilaam comes to Pharaoh. The Jewish people had been slaves a long time at this point, and Bilaam comes to Pharaoh and says, I've seen something in the stars. Bilaam was one of the chief advisors of Pharaoh. In fact, he was one of the chief instigators in getting the Jews into slavery in the first place. And he tells Pharaoh, I've seen something in the stars. I see that the Redeemer of the Jewish people is going to be born. And of course, that was very bad for Pharaoh. Pharaoh was very threatened. He didn't want the Jewish people to leave. And he told Bilaam, what can we do about it? And Bilaam says, I see in the stars as well that the Redeemer is going to be harmed through water. His fall is going to come about through water. So he told him, very simple, all Jewish boys that are going to be born, take the Jewish boys and throw them into the Nile, and that will be it. They'll be destroyed by water, and the Jewish people will be slaves forever. Pharaoh loved the suggestion. He hated the Jews already, so he didn't need much more invitation to harm the Jewish people. And so he put out this decree, and Jewish children started dying. The girls were able to survive, and as the rabbis teach us, girls had a way nastier fate. They were going to be brainwashed into Egyptian culture and Egyptian mentalities, but the Jewish boys were to be killed as soon as they were born. And this went on for quite a while, and Jewish parents didn't know what to do. Their sons were being killed. At that time, a man by the name of Amram and his wife, whose name was Yocheved, led the Jewish people, and Amram dedicated his life to giving encouragement and guidance and showing the Jewish people how to follow in the ways of Hashem. They had two children, a girl whose name was Miriam, and a boy, Aaron, who was 3 years younger. And at some point, the persecution, especially the killing of the children, got so bad that Amram thought to himself, what use is there being married? We're having children and Pharaoh's killing them. Let's get divorced. So he divorced his wife. And his wife didn't hold of this, but at the same time, Amram divorced her. And she was very upset, but their marriage was over. All the Jewish people saw Amram, the leader of the Jewish people, had divorced his wife. So they in turn divorced their wives. According to one opinion, Yocheved actually got married to someone else in the meantime and had two sons whose names were Eldad and Medad. They were going to come up later on when the Jewish people were in the desert, two very righteous boys who survived. Miriam, meanwhile, goes to her father and says, you're worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh has decreed against just the boys, but your decree, separating from my mother and all the Jewish people following suit and divorcing their wives, has caused that neither boys nor girls are born. Your decree is worse than Pharaoh's decree, because at least Pharaoh's decree is letting the women survive. And Miriam told her father further, she says, I have a prophecy, and the prophecy is you and Yocheved are going to have another child, and this child is going to be the Redeemer of the Jewish people. And Amram was convinced that Miriam's prophecy was true. And he got back with his wife, even though that's forbidden. Once a man divorces a wife and she remarries someone else, it's forbidden to go back. But this is before the Torah was given. They went back together and they had a child. And of course, this was very high profile. They got together, all the Jewish people, the husbands and wives all got together, and then she became pregnant. And of course, all the Egyptian soldiers were counting down the 9 months until this child was going to be born, because this is the most high-profile birth. Of course, they're going to make sure that this child is killed. After 6 months, which was on the 7th of Adar, Moshe was born. Because he was 3 months premature, the soldiers never assumed that the child was born yet. They knew they had 3 months left until they had to come and check to see if the baby was born. So they didn't even bother coming to their house yet. And Moshe's parents had the child in the house for 3 months, and no one knew better. No one even knew the child was already born. The moment Moshe was born, the entire house was filled with light. And the mother saw this, and Moshe's mother gave him the name Tuvia, which comes from Toiv, good. The verse itself, the pasuk itself, talks about Moshe being good. Moshe's mother saw so much goodness in him. Additionally, he was born already circumcised, which is further pointing towards Moshe's perfection. And Moshe started talking from the moment he was born. He didn't wait like regular children a year until starting to talk, or many months. The day that he was born, he already began conversing with his parents and already started his formal education already began from moment zero of Moshe's birth. He was given a bunch of other names. Tuvia is one of them. Yukusio, Cheve, Yered, Avizana, Avisoichai, Avigdar is also one of his names. Shemaiah ben Nesanel is also one of the names that Moshe was given. The Medrash records all these interesting names that Moshe was given and all the amazing reasons of why he was given these names. And the first 3 months were beautiful. Moshe was raised like a regular child in his parents' house. Incredible parents. Amram is considered one of the 4 people in history that never did a single sin. The only reason why Amram even died was because human beings are destined to die after the whole story of eating from the tree of good and evil. But if not for the eating the tree of evil, Amram had not a single sin to point to that would have made him die. He was one of the 4 perfect people, the only 4 people in history that were absolutely perfect throughout their life. And Moshe lived in his parents' house for 3 months. But after 3 months, it became a little more complicated. And the reason why is Bilaam came back to Pharaoh and told Pharaoh, I see something strange. I see that the child's going to be born, the Redeemer of the Jewish people, but for some reason I can't determine if he's going to be a Jewish child, if he's going to be an Egyptian child. I see some connection to both. Now, of course, as the story is going to show, Bilaam was seeing quite correctly, but his confusion made it very difficult. So he told Pharaoh, I don't know what to do, because something about this child's very Egyptian. And so Pharaoh made a very difficult decision, and you can see just how much he hated Jewish people. He said, you know what? Starting from this point, every child, no matter whether it's Jewish or it's Egyptian, is to be murdered as soon as it's born. It's to be thrown into the Nile, because the water is the foil of this future Redeemer of the Jewish people. And that made Pharaoh very unpopular with the Egyptians, as you can imagine, because their children were all getting murdered now. 3 months go by, and Yocheved has 2 problems on hand. Number one, the soldiers are on their way at some point to come check to see, has she given birth or has she not given birth, because now it's 9 months after. And problem number 2 was people were getting killed, and she knew that until her child was in the water, the killing would continue. But the second her child had reached the water, possibly this killing would stop. So she decided to do a trick. She understood the nature of stargazing and the nature of magic it's not a precise art. It doesn't tell you perfectly exactly what's going to happen. It gives you general ideas, so you could trick it. So what she did is she prepared a basket. And she made the basket out of reeds and she cut it from the outside, because Moshe was a righteous man. Hashem didn't want a righteous person like Moshe to be smelling tar and unpleasant smells. And she knew that she wasn't now going to not be at the child's wedding, because she, as far as she was concerned, this baby was never going to make it. She had called Miriam, and she poked Miriam in the forehead and said, you prophesied that this child was going to redeem the Jewish people. What happened to your prophecy? Earlier on, when they got married, Amram, the father, called Yocheved, and Amram kissed her on her forehead and said, credit to you for your prophecy. But now that it all gone sideways, Yocheved calls her daughter Miriam and tells her, Miriam, what happened to your prophecy? She puts a wedding canopy over Moshe's basket, because she says, at least I should be at some form of wedding canopy, because she didn't believe that he was going to make it through the day. They're putting the basket onto the Nile. And she sent Miriam to go put the basket there and to wait by the child, hoping that the decree would be annulled and they'd be able to collect the baby and bring the baby back home, because the magicians would go to Pharaoh and say, yep, we see the baby inside the Nile. Many years later, Moshe was to tell the Jewish people that I'm the one that stopped the decree, because as soon as I went to the Nile, Pharaoh stopped the decree. Yocheved's plan worked extremely successfully. They put the baby into the Nile, and the moment they did, Bilaam looked into the stars and saw that it had been done. The Jewish Redeemer had been placed in the water. They didn't imagine that it had been placed inside a basket inside the water. Again, not a precise art. And so he just saw the Redeemer had been connected to the water. That's it. Of course, it's all just somewhere around the Jewish area, throwing a baby into the water. That was it. It was done. He rushes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh, who was so anxious to annul this decree, because it wasn't just Jewish people dying, it was Egyptians. He quickly cancelled the decree, and he cancelled it for both Egyptians and for Jewish people. He just cancelled the decree, said no one's to be killing any more children. And so the decree was over, but Moshe was still inside the water. At that time, that particular day was a boiling hot day. And all people in Egypt all flocked to the Nile to bathe because it was so unbelievably hot. One of the people that went was the princess, Pharaoh's own daughter. Pharaoh's own daughter was a very special woman. We discussed her a little in earlier podcasts. And her name was Basya. And Basya went to the water not just to freshen herself up from a boiling hot day, but her intention of going to the water, say the rabbis, was in order to convert. She knew that one of the processes of joining the Jewish people was going to mikvah, going to a ritual bath, but obviously in a live body of water. And so she went to the Nile with intention of converting to join the Jewish people because she realized the idolatry of her father's house, or Pharaoh's house, was ridiculous. And she knew that the Jewish people had the truth and a true God. And she said, well, I need to join them. So her intention going down was to convert. She comes down to the water and she has a bunch of attendants with her. They see a basket floating and they see inside a young baby. The people that were with Basya tell Basya, this is your father's decree. All Jewish children, or all children for that matter, need to be killed. You need to kill the child. And Basya says no. And the first reason why she said no is because she had a very, very bad case of leprosy. And the second she touched the basket and touched the boy, the leprosy vanished on the spot. She instantly knew this was a special child, and she fell in love with this little boy. And she said, "I'm going to raise this boy. This is going to be my son now." Her attendants, her maids, told her, "Listen, if a king makes a decree and no one listens, at least his own children should listen. What are you doing, keeping the baby? Kill the baby." And it's a discussion whether it was her herself that killed her maids, or whether an angel came and killed them. Whatever the case was, only one maid survived. That one maid was just left there to be an honor guy. A princess walking alone in the streets of Egypt would be disrespectful to the princess. So there was one survivor, but Basya was insistent on keeping this child. And meanwhile, Miriam and Aaron are watching from the side. Basya's taking the baby. And Basya calls midwives, expert midwives, all trying to feed the baby. The baby would not eat. The baby only wanted to eat from his mother. Moshe only wanted to eat from his mother. And no matter who they brought, it wouldn't work. And at that point, Miriam realized that she needs to make herself available. So she jumps in and says, I know a Jewish lady who's exceptionally good at taking care of children. Perhaps she'll have luck and she'll be able to feed the baby. So Miriam runs home and calls Yocheved. She was very wise. The rabbis point to it and say the fact that she didn't reveal a single thing. This little baby was her younger brother. The person she was calling was the mother of the child. She didn't say a word about that. She just said, I know someone who could solve this problem. And Basya was agreeable because this baby was going to die. Otherwise, the baby would not eat. And so she goes and calls Yocheved, the actual mother of the baby. And of course, the baby ate. And Basya said, well, if that's the case, I can't bring the baby home just yet. What I'll do is, Yocheved, I'll pay you to watch the baby for 2 years. You feed the baby, wait for the baby to get older, and when the baby's 2 years, I'll come back and collect the baby. And of course, I'll compensate you. And so, in a real strange turn of events, Yocheved was paid an absolute fortune by Basya, the royal princess, to take care of her own son for 2 years. And which he did. And during that years, that's when Moshe got his formative education. Again, he was not a regular child. He was born perfect. He was born to be exactly who he was supposed to be. His day of his birth was far greater than the day of his passing because Moshe couldn't become anything but the person he was going to become. He was one of those rare types of individuals who were born perfect and remain that way throughout their entire life. And so his education began at literally at age 0. His parents raised him for 2 years, and they taught him all the Torah that he needed to know to survive him the rest of his life. Of course, until he would start talking to God and be the actual official transmitter of the Torah. But Moshe got his formative education in the first 2 years of his life, living in his own house, being paid by the princess, Pharaoh's own daughter, for his parents to take care of him. When he turned 2 years old, Yocheved brought Moshe to the palace, and Moshe began his life in the palace. And that was it. He was gone. All the Jewish people lived in the lands of Goshen and the surrounding lands and were dealing with opposition. And yes, Moshe wouldn't have been a slave anyway because he came from the tribe of Levi. And the tribe of Levi, they were priests. They dealt in holiness their whole life. They weren't actually part of the slavery. Nonetheless, Moshe lived in the palace. He had no experiences seeing what the Jewish people were going through. His father was the Jewish leader. And he was the other side of the country in the royal palace as being treated like an official grandson of the king. And he was exceptionally popular. He was very handsome. And the Medrash writes people would stare at him. They were so dumbfounded by his sheer handsomeness that they would just They couldn't get enough of looking at him. And he was exceptionally popular, and he had this aura of goodness, this aura of angel-like that surrounded him, that made him an exceptionally popular person, an exceptionally successful person. And at some point, throughout the years of him growing up in the palace, he was officially appointed by his step-grandfather, Pharaoh, to be head of the household. And Pharaoh never put together that this was firstly the child who had been predicted to save the Jewish people, but also a Jewish boy that was living in his palace, who he believed to be his grandson, was actually the son of the leader of the Jewish people. When Moshe turned 3, however, before Moshe's rise in the palace, Moshe had an incident. Pharaoh didn't want Moshe coming into a royal ceremony or a royal feast until he was 3. But when he turned 3 years old, Pharaoh threw a massive party and invited all the important dignitaries, and invited, of course, the young 3-year-old Moshe, and Moshe played on Pharaoh's lap. And Moshe saw the crown of Pharaoh, and he was fascinated. He took the crown off and put it on his own head, and of course the crowd was livid, and they were furious and confused, and this is a very superstitious crowd. Pharaoh himself, extremely superstitious man, quickly calls his advisor and says, "What does this mean? Why is my grandson taking the crown off my head and putting it on his own head? This obviously means something." And Bilaam was called, and Bilaam said, "This obviously means that this child is going to take over your kingdom. He's bad news, kill him." And Pharaoh was ready to kill. And meanwhile, Yisro, another one of Pharaoh's advisors, who's going to come up later on in the story, Yisro jumps up and says, "He's a 3-year-old kid. What are you doing? He's your grandson. You can't just kill him like that." Pharaoh says, "Well, look at him. He took the crown off my head. Of course, he's bad news. We've got to get rid of him." And Yisro said, "He's an innocent 3-year-old. He's just playing. He sees something sparkly. He's going for it. So you can't kill him over this." So Pharaoh says, "Well, how do we determine whether this is innocent or whether this is somehow malevolent, somehow deeper and more sinister? He's trying to take over my kingdom." Yisro said, "Make a test. Determine if he's attracted to sparkly things, or if he's after greed, or he's after money, or he's after power." And so Pharaoh said, "What do you suggest?" He said, "Make 2 baskets, 2 buckets. One bucket, fill it with gold and precious things. What does a child know of precious things? And the second one, make a very, very boiling hot coals, orange coals. The orange coals are going to be a lot sparklier than the gold and the silver. If he goes for the gold and the silver, well, then there you go. He's obviously has designs, he has plans to take over your kingdom. But if a 3-year-old goes for the sparkly coals, well, in that case, obviously he's just going after whatever's more sparkly." Pharaoh loved the suggestion. They brought 2 buckets. One was filled with boiling hot coals, and one was filled with gold and silver. Now, the thing you need to remember is that Moshe was wise. He wasn't a regular 3-year-old. So he saw both these options, understood the coals were dangerous, understood the gold and the silver has value. So he went right for the gold and silver. An angel actually came and pushed his hand towards the coals. So he picked up the coals. And of course, he burnt himself. It was boiling hot. And so he took the coals to cool it up and put it into his mouth. Moshe's famous stutter and his inability to talk and pronounce many letters that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't pronounce. Even when Moshe later on in the story was begging God, "Don't make me the redeemer of the Jewish people. Get someone who's more eloquent with speaking." The reason was because Moshe had a massive speech deformity. He had burnt his mouth so badly as a child that he couldn't pronounce so many words. And Moshe said, the all-knowing, all-powerful God is sending a messenger to go give a message to King Pharaoh of Egypt. Send someone with a little charisma, someone that's able to talk well. And Moshe, though he was extremely charismatic, he wasn't eloquent in talking because he had a tremendous stutter that wasn't healed until the giving of the Torah, when all ailments, anyone that was surrounding the mountain, all their ailments were cured, including Moshe Rabbeinu's stutter. Moshe's mouth went back to being perfectly normal. But for the bulk of his life, Moshe Rabbeinu dealt with a very, very heavy stutter. Pharaoh was now convinced that Moshe was innocent, and Moshe began to rise in power within the castle. And as he began to rise in power, Bilaam started realizing that these rumors of him wanting Moshe to be killed were starting to spread, and Bilaam started getting very concerned. Moshe was now a very, very formidable opponent. This was someone to really contend with, and as Moshe got more and more powerful, Bilaam realized it was time for him to leave. And that's exactly what he did. He took his family and he rushed out of Egypt, and he didn't want to deal with Moshe as Moshe got more powerful, because he knew it's a matter of time until Moshe did him off. And so he left. Moshe, meanwhile, was trapped in the palace. He was one of the most powerful men alive. He was running Pharaoh's entire household. At the same time, he was a high-ranking personnel. He couldn't just go wherever he wanted, and he so badly wanted to see what was going on with his brothers, what was going on with the Jewish people. He knew that the slavery had gotten more and more intense with every passing day, but he never got a chance to actually see what was going on. And finally, one time he got a chance, and he went and he was devastated. He couldn't believe what he saw. He saw people being oppressed to such a degree, and Moshe's heart bled so. He was so disheartened and so torn by what he saw. He literally picked up the tools and began working himself. And people rushed in and said, what's the grandson of Pharaoh doing, working like a slave? And Moshe just said, I believe in Pharaoh's cause so much, I want to join into the effort as well. They're helping build the country, I want to help build the country too. No one thought much of it, but for Moshe, his immediate reaction when seeing how much oppression the Jewish people were going through, he said, I got to help. I got to make at least a little difference. Let me do something to do some help. A while later, Moshe got another chance to go back. And the other time when he went back, Moshe saw something very disturbing. He saw there was an Egyptian man, a taskmaster, a very powerful taskmaster, a close friend of Pharaoh, in fact. And then this taskmaster was beating a Jewish man, one of the Jewish taskmasters. Pharaoh had set up a system that there were slaves, and then every certain amount of Jewish slaves had a man who was on top of them. And those men, who the overseers, who themselves were Jewish, had to in turn report to an Egyptian overseer. And the Egyptian overseers were very mean to the Jewish overseers that had to report, they had to report to. And so one of these Egyptian overseers was beating a Jewish overseer. And the reason wasn't actually to do with the work, it was to do with the fact that this Egyptian man had attacked this Jewish man's wife and pretended to be the Jewish man's and taken advantage of the situation. But he was so embarrassed that he had been with a Jewish woman that he was now beating the one person who knew the truth about what he had done. And his plan, of course, was to beat this man to death so that no one would know that he had been with a Jewish woman, thereby embarrassing himself in front of all the Egyptians. So he was planning to kill him. Moshe sees this all, and Moshe was furious. Moshe came up to the man, and Moshe looked at him, but didn't just regular stare at him. Moshe looked right through him and looked through the histories, all the potential generations that were going to come from this man. Moshe was trying to determine, would anyone of value ever be a descendant of this man? Throughout all of history, all the potential descendants of this man would have. And after going through it all, Moshe determined not a single person was a virtue that was going to come from this person. And so Moshe said the name of God, and the man dropped dead. Just like that. And so, in order to hide the evidence, then the only people that saw Moshe do that were fellow Jewish people who hated the Egyptian overseer more than words could describe. Moshe, whether Moshe dug and buried the man, or whether he used the name of God and the Egyptian overseer's body went into the ground, whatever the case was, Moshe got rid of the evidence, and that was it. Moshe returned later and sees that the man whose life he had saved was fighting with someone else, and they were actually about to go to blows. They hadn't yet hit each other, but one of them had his hand in the air to strike the other. It was connected with the same drama, the fact that he had slept with the Jewish overseer's wife. It spiraled into dramas beyond that, and now they were literally coming to blows. And Moshe turned to one of them and said, "Wicked man, why are you striking your brother?" Moshe said, "A man that hasn't even struck someone else, but once has lifted his hand with intention to strike, that's such deplorable behavior. That already defines a person to be wicked. Whether he strikes or not, of course, striking is even worse, but even lifting your hand with intention to strike is such a disgusting thing. Someone that does that is considered a wicked person." And these two men, respectively, were Dathan and Aviram. These men later on were going to create a tremendous amount of trouble for Moshe in the desert. They weren't traditionally known as good people. And they saw Moshe show up, and they told Moshe, "Are you going to kill us like you killed that man yesterday?" Now, what Moshe had done the day before was saving his life. And Moshe had done it in the most virtuous, most selfless way. He put himself in incredible danger. He couldn't believe that the people who he had saved, the person he had saved, was now willing to use that as blackmail to hurt him. And Moshe suddenly understood something really tragic. Until now, he'd always been confused. He had always tried to understand, I know that the Jewish people are supposed to be slaves. God had promised Abraham that was going to happen. But why were they getting persecuted so? But why was it such a disastrous persecution? Moshe couldn't work that out. That wasn't part of the deal that God had told Abraham. He just said, slaves, okay, they could be treated decently. It's never in the best interest of slave owners to be cruel or mean to their slaves. It might be human nature, but it's not a clever thing to. Why were the Jewish people having that? And he couldn't understand. But now that he saw the hatred that they had among each other, Moshe just saved this man's life, and this man was now willing to blackmail him and threaten him and destroy Moshe's life. Moshe said, oh, now I understand why God's making it not just regular slavery, but such an intense, dreadful persecution. And Moshe realized he had a big problem. Dasan and Aviram, they were very wealthy men. They managed to get access to Pharaoh, and they told Pharaoh, you know how your overseer, a friend of yours who's gone missing, Moshe's the one that killed him. Also, Moshe is Jewish, and also Moshe's father is the leader of the Jewish people, and they told all of Moshe's secrets to Pharaoh, and of course Pharaoh wanted Moshe dead. So Moshe comes back, Moshe's arrested, he's thrown into prison, and he's given a death sentence. Now there's different opinions among the rabbis exactly what happened next, whether Moshe himself was brought into the throne room for execution, or whether it was an angel that looked like Moshe that was brought to the throne room. But whatever the case was, Moshe was brought, or an angel looking like Moshe was brought to the throne room. They placed Moshe down to execute him. An executioner with an axe came to chop his head off. He swung the axe over Moshe's neck, and Moshe's neck became hard like marble. The axe snapped, the axe head went right back into the executioner, killing him on the spot, and pandemonium broke out. Complete chaos, because everyone was so confused, and Moshe, in the confusion, literally ran for his life, and just kept on running. I got another opinion, it wasn't actually Moshe was still in the jails, or he was somewhere else, and when the confusion all broke out, because the angel, of course, didn't die, Moshe escaped. But whatever the case was, and whatever age Moshe was, because there's a whole discussion of its own right, Moshe ran for his life, and he knew that he couldn't go back to Egypt. Going back to Egypt would be a death sentence, and so he ran. There are opinions that say he was 12, there are other opinions that say he was 18, there are other opinions that give other ages for how old Moshe was when he ran away, but Moshe didn't run east, as most people say, right after this story, but Moshe rather ran south. Moshe ran towards the Kingdom of Kush, which is deeper, more south in Africa than Egypt is. He comes to Kush, which is another empire where he's safe now. He's not dealing with the Egyptian kingdom anymore, so he doesn't have to be worried about Pharaoh and all those accusations against him. And he comes to the Kingdom of Kush at a very pivotal time. The king of Kush at that time was a very noble man, a very noble king. His name was Kuknos. And he controlled not just the Kingdom of Kush, which is a very large kingdom in Africa, but he also had lots of vassal states that were east of present-day Israel, in the Jordan and the Syria area. And these kingdoms were under his control, and they had to give him heavy taxes, and he ruled over them as an extension of his own kingdom. At that time, while the drama is going on in Egypt, those kingdoms decided that they want to rebel against their emperor, let's call it. And so Kuknos gathered a massive army and went to Aram and Syria and all the lands of the east to wage a war and to put them back in line. While he was gone, he needed someone to run his kingdom, and he made the dreadful mistake of trusting Bilaam. Bilaam had escaped to Kush as well, running away from Moshe. Bilaam was a very wise man, a very accomplished man, devious and evil, but very smart and wise. Kuknos trusted him and said, listen, you rule my kingdom, I'll go to war and put the rebellions, quash the rebellions, and in the meantime you just take care of the capital city, take care of the empire, make sure everything's safe. And so he left the capital city in the hands of Bilaam. He went to war, he quashed the rebellions. Kuknos was an incredible military strategist. He quashed the rebellions, and he started to make his way back to his capital city. And he arrives at the capital city and notices massive changes. Two of the walls that surrounded the entire capital city, two of the walls were much, much higher. And Kuknos was a little confused, but then he thought it's very wise. In the interim, while he was gone, the kingdoms of Canaan, before Israel was conquered, there were powerful kingdoms in Canaan, and they could have attacked in the meanwhile. So putting up those high defenses was a very good strategic decision. So Kuknos was very impressed. And they came closer and they noticed that one of the walls had a massive moat, and the fourth wall had pits with snakes inside. And so Kuknus comes to the front door, waiting for the doors to open, and of course the doors don't, and he suddenly realizes that Bilaam wasn't locking out the kingdoms of Canaan. Bilaam was locking him out of his own capital. And his family and all the soldiers' families were all inside the capital, but there was no way out. And Bilaam had loyalists who had managed to convince to stay on his team, and the first day they decided to scale the walls, of course, but the walls were so high and the arrows were rained on top of them, and there was a lot of casualties, and Kuknus had to fall back. And the next day they build rafts and they go over the moat. Bilaam had constructed incredible machines that were able to displace tremendous amount of waters and then replace those same waters in quick succession of each other, which created powerful waves that made the moat impossible to get through. And so then the following day they said, well, the only thing left is to go through the fields of poisonous snakes, and they quickly realized that was a very bad choice. And so they were stuck outside of their own castle, and Kuknus had his entire military, which are extremely powerful military, but there was no way to get into his own city, and he was locked outside. He built a massive wall around the wall, making sure that there was all the people inside were starving and under siege, hoping he could wear them down. They were well equipped. And so they lay siege on their own capital city, and for 9 years, Kuknus surrounded his own capital city, trying to get Bilaam to open the doors and let him and his men into their own capital city. But that never happened. And during that time, Moshe arrives, and he sees this massive army camping outside its own city walls, and Moshe investigates, and Moshe joins. And slowly people start to discover that this new man that's running away from Egypt is someone incredible. He has a face like an angel, and he's so charismatic and such a wonderful person. And very quickly Moshe starts rising through the ranks of Kuknus' army, and at some point the king himself meets him and is fascinated with Moshe, and he marvels at Moshe's brilliance, and he appoints him as one of his chief advisors. And after 9 years of laying siege against his own city, the king falls ill. And 7 days later, the king dies. They build a monument and they bury him outside the walls of his own city. And now the men don't know what to do. They realize, in addition to being locked out of their own city, they have a bigger problem. That is, all those vassal states, all those countries that they had conquered, it's going to be a matter of time until they discover that not only are they locked out of their city, but the brilliant war expert, Kuknus, who's the one that managed to get them all in line and win all the battles, when they hear that they're locked out of the city and he's dead as well, they realize they're standing in the middle of nowhere. It's a matter of time until these armies rebel, and also they're sitting ducks. And so they realize they need to find for themselves someone who could be a king, someone who could help them take back their kingdom and assure themselves that they're able to protect themselves against these vassal states, keeping them in line and also making sure that they don't overtake them. And so they decided the best strategy would be to appoint Moshe to be the new king. And so they all called Moshe. They made a massive platform for him. They gave him a throne to sit on, and they all gifted him a tremendous amount of gifts. And they told Moshe, we're appointing you to be the new king. Find a way to get us into the city. And Moshe told them like this. He said, if you want me to get you into the city, the condition you need to do is you need to swear complete loyalty to me. Complete loyalty, which means you will do whatever I say, no matter whether you understand or whether you don't understand it. The men realized they had nothing to lose. It was a tall ask to ask people to swear complete loyal fealty to do whatever you're demanded of, but at the same time, they didn't see many options, and they were in a real bind. So they swore to Moshe they would do whatever he said. And Moshe told them like this: now that you've sworn, I'm going to make a challenge. And the challenge is like the price of death, which means anyone that doesn't see through this challenge and do this challenge successfully will be killed. Every person's to go and scour the countrysides to find storks, and then find their eggs. Every soldier's to have one stork egg, stork like the bird. Every soldier's to have an egg of a stork, and you're all to collect them. And so that's what they did. They scoured the countryside. They were highly motivated because they realized that Moshe meant it. If they didn't find a stork egg, they would be killed. And so every single soldier found one eventually. And they came to Moshe and said, what's the next instruction? And Moshe said, next instruction is everyone's to train them. You're to take these storks, wait till they hatch, and then treat them like your own pets. Make sure that they're used to you and they trust you, and get used to riding on your shoulders while you ride, and make sure that they literally act like loyal pets to you. and anyone that doesn't manage to do this will be killed. Moshe told them, you swore to do this, now you need to actually completely see this through. Find these stalks and gain the loyalty of these stalks. And that's what that happened. Over the next length of time, I'm not sure how long it was, Moshe's men, all the soldiers of the Kush army, they were all now completely loyal to Moshe, all had sworn fealty to Moshe, had all had these stalks that they were training, and these stalks became very used to the soldiers, used to marching on the shoulders of the soldiers. And as these stalks started getting larger, they started trusting these men more, and these men were able to give commands to the stalks, and these stalks would actually see through the commands. They became like well-trained birds. Finally, they came to Moshe, and Moshe told them like this. He said, I want you to starve the stalks. No one's to give any food or any drink to the stalks for 3 days. And everyone, of course, was shocked, but Moshe told them that was the deal. The deal was complete loyalty. You had to not to question me, you had to do exactly that. And so they did it. And after the third day, these stalks were literally starving. Moshe told them we're going to war now. And they put the stalks on the shoulders of each man, and they started marching towards the city by way of the wall that had the venomous snakes. And as soon as they came closer to the city, and they started seeing the venomous snakes, the stalks saw them as well. And the stalks were starving. The stalks started jumping off the shoulders of the soldiers and started attacking the snakes. And because the stalks had such large beaks, they would literally attack the snakes, getting killed in response. And within a short amount of time, there was not a single poisonous snake inside the entire field. And Moshe and his men started marching on the actual capital city itself. There were still loyalists within the city, and throughout the battle, they killed, I believe, 1,100 men. Moshe's men managed to kill from Bilaam's army, but all the rest of the people were family members of the soldiers. They had no intention of going against them. They stayed in the house, and it was a very bloodless war compared to what it could have been. Bilaam, meanwhile, and his 2 sons, and he had 8 brothers there with him as well, they realized at this point that they had lost the war, and that Moshe's men were coming for them, and so they fled the city as quick as they could. Moshe became officially coronated as the king of Kush. He had an official coronation. They gave him the crown. He ruled the country. And a short while later, when the other vassal states heard that Moshe was now the king, some man they'd never heard of, Kukunus was dead, they declared war. And they said, well, we want to be free. We don't want to be under Kush anymore. Moshe took the entire army, marched back to those countries that had rebelled, made a war. And when they saw just how successful Moshe was at war, they realized he's very much an equal to the previous king of Kush, King Kukunus. They quickly submitted, and they agreed to all the terms of surrender that Moshe had put upon them, and they agreed to be a vassal state again of Kush. And Moshe returned to the kingdom of Kush, and for the next 40 years he was king of Kush, completely ruling the kingdom. In the next class, we'll talk about what happens at the end of 40 years.
Thank you for listening to Untold Stories of the Torah. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing to this channel and leaving us a review.